Go away, bitch. Don't come over here. Karen, call the cops. Call the... There's all these kids in here. Call the cops, you dumb bitch. He coming around the window. Go that way, Cameron. Yeah, bitch, go away, bye. What? Go away, bye. Yep, bye. Bye. Keon out here.
Like you said, the Philadelphia Police Department announced just a few moments ago that the medical examiner had ruled that Kada Scott's death was a homicide. It was announced on Twitter by Deputy Commissioner Frank Venor. Now, I do know how Kada Scott was murdered. We're not releasing that information, making sure that the family has been notified. But police department is recommending to the DA to file those murder charges, and just a few of the new details we're learning about the disappearance and murder.
The man charged in the brutal murder of Kada Scott will head to trial. A judge holding Keon King on all charges, including murder and kidnapping. The 23-year-old woman was found dead on October 18th, buried in a shallow grave behind a vacant middle school in East Germantown.
Our Kelly Rule was in court today. And Kelly, what are you learning?
Well, Benji, in the Commonwealth's testimony today heavily relied on cell phone evidence and call detail records that they say tied King's phone to the movements of his car and to several key locations connected to Kada's death, including where she worked and where she was last seen the night she disappeared, and to the crime scene. The defense argued, on the other hand, that none of that connected King to Kada's death, but a judge ultimately disagreed.
A Philadelphia judge looked at the evidence. Surveillance footage of two figures moving a heavy object in the dead of night, cell phone pings tracing a path from a woman's workplace to her shallow grave, and a 43-second phone call that ended with the words, "I can't believe you're calling me." Then, the judge made his ruling. The case against 21-year-old Keon King for the murder of 23-year-old Kada Scott would proceed to trial. For the Scott family, packed into the courtroom, it was a step toward accountability. But the 5-hour preliminary hearing revealed more than just a roadmap to trial. It exposed the cold, digital mechanics of a crime and left a glaring, unanswered question hanging in the air. Who is the second person in that video? Welcome to True Crime Unravelled. If you're looking for a deep dive into the evidence that doesn't shy away from the tough questions, you're in the right place. To our community on YouTube, Facebook, and TikTok, we see every comment. Your insights drive this channel. So, if you're new here, join us. Hit subscribe. Now, let's get into the details. To understand the weight of today's hearing, we rewind to October 4th, 2025. Kada Scott, a bright 23-year-old Penn State graduate and nursing assistant, arrived for her overnight shift at the terrace at Chestnut Hill Senior Home. Her night unraveled almost immediately. A coworker testified she saw Kada leave minutes after arriving on her phone, appearing upset and scared, uttering those now fateful words, "I can't believe you're calling me." She left her personal car behind. Her remains would be discovered 2 weeks later, on October 18th, in a shallow grave behind the abandoned Ada Lewis Middle School in East Germantown. The cause of death? A gunshot wound to the head. The man arrested in connection just days after she vanished? Keon King. Today's hearing was about one thing. Did the prosecution have enough evidence to justify a trial? For over 4 hours, they painted a damning picture built on forensics and surveillance. First, the digital timeline. Prosecutors presented evidence that the upsetting 43-second call Kada received was from Keon King. They detailed a text conversation leading up to that night, suggesting a plan to meet. Investigators testified about using a forgotten iPad linked to Kada's Apple ID to trace her missing phone, iPad, and Apple Watch. The data placed her devices, and by inference, her, with King's phone at key locations, her workplace, the Aubrey Recreation Center parking lot, and finally, the area of the Ada Lewis School. Second, the surveillance footage. This was perhaps the most visceral evidence. Prosecutors showed video from the recreation center near the school. It showed a stolen black Hyundai Accent, the vehicle they believe Kada entered, parked, and sitting for over 30 hours. Then, in the early morning hours of October 6th, The video captures a gold Toyota Camry, registered to King, arriving. Two individuals are seen. They wait for hours. Then, at 3:56 a.m., they approach the Hyundai. The footage shows them removing a heavy, body-shaped object and carrying it out of frame toward the school grounds. The prosecution's allegation was clear. This was Kada Scott's body being moved to its burial site. Third, the grim discovery. Homicide detectives testified about the tip that led them back to the school, where they found Kada's body in a grave only 3 to 4 inches deep. Photos shown in court, which prompted warnings from the judge and caused family members to leave, depicted Kada in a fetal position, showing significant decomposition. The coroner's report confirmed the gunshot wound. Fourth, the attempt to destroy evidence. The prosecution linked King's phone data to the location where the stolen Hyundai was later found, torched and set ablaze. King's defense attorney, Robert Gonberg, argued a central point. While the evidence placed King's phone and car at locations, it did not directly connect Keon King to the act of killing Kada Scott. He pointed to the lack of forensic evidence like DNA or the murder weapon directly tying his client to the homicide itself.
The man charged in the brutal murder of Kada Scott will head to trial. A judge holding Keon King on all charges, including murder and kidnapping. The 23-year-old woman was found dead on October 18th, buried in a shallow grave behind a vacant middle school in East Germantown.
Our Kelly Rule was in court today. And Kelly, what are you learning?
Well, Jason, the Commonwealth's testimony today heavily relied on cell phone evidence and call detail records that they say tied King's phone to the movements of his car and to several key locations connected to Kada's death, including where she worked and where she was last seen the night she disappeared, and to the crime scene. The defense argued, on the other hand, that none of that connected King to Kada's death, but a judge ultimately disagreed. After an emotional 5-hour preliminary hearing, 23-year-old Kada Scott's father and other family members left the courthouse without commenting after a judge ruled that her accused killer, Keon King, will head to trial on all charges. Kada's father, Kevin, wearing a jacket with her name, their attorney speaking on their behalf.
Today was the first day, the first step in accountability and getting justice for Kada Scott.
The prosecution called several witnesses, including 2 homicide detectives, that went into extensive detail on how they linked King's phone number to a TextMe account, a phone app where you can make calls and send messages on Wi-Fi, that he was allegedly using to message with Kada in the days leading up to her disappearance and the night she disappeared. They testified how that phone pinged to key locations connected to Kada's death. Kada was reported missing on October 4th, 2025, after arriving at her overnight job, a senior living facility in East Mount Airy, around 10 p.m. A coworker testified today that she saw Kada leaving the building that night, on the phone appearing upset, saying, "I can't believe you called me." Her remains were found in a shallow grave near the former Ada Lewis Middle School after a nearly 2-week search. Detectives played surveillance video at Albury Recreation Center today, next to the former Ada Lewis Middle School, the night Kada disappeared and the days following. The prosecution says it shows a black Hyundai Accent parked from the night of October 4th until the early morning hours of October 6th, and a 1999 gold Toyota Camry registered to King come and go from the rec center lot. At one point, early on October 6th, the video shows 2 figures appearing to move something heavy from the Hyundai, then disappearing out of camera view, according to the prosecution. That same day, the gold Toyota Camry and Keon King appear in cameras at the Criminal Justice Center in Center City, where the prosecution says he had to appear in court for an unrelated matter. On October 7th, the prosecution says the black Hyundai Accent was set on fire in an alleyway behind the 2300 block of 74th Avenue, an area detectives also tracked King's phone number to. Now, King's attorney also argued that messages exchanged between King and Kada the night she disappeared showed plans to meet, seemingly for a date. That was his argument. Kada allegedly messaged King saying, "Kidnap me again," to which King replied, "Better be up too." Now, King's attorney would not comment on camera, but did say King plans to plead not guilty at his arraignment, which is scheduled for February 23rd.
It's a classic circumstantial case defense playbook. But in that courtroom, legal strategy collided with raw human emotion. Kada's father, Kevin Scott, sat wearing a jacket bearing her name. Family members gasped and wept as the photos were displayed. Their attorney, later, stated the family's unimaginable grief is matched only by their commitment to finding and maintaining accountability. Keon King is scheduled for a formal arraignment on February 23rd, where he will enter a plea. Given today's proceedings, a not guilty plea is all but certain. This sets the stage for a full trial, likely months down the line. So, what will the trial focus on? The prosecution will double down on building a narrative from the digital and video mosaic. They will seek to prove King's actions before and after. The texts, the pings, the moving of the body, the arson, are so indicative of guilt that they can overcome the lack of direct physical evidence from the murder scene itself. But the elephant in the room, highlighted by that surveillance video, is conspiracy. The charge is already on the docket. The video shows two people. The prosecution's own evidence suggests a prolonged, multi-step cover-up. The question the trial must answer is, was Keon King acting alone, or was he part of a team? If it was a team, who was the other person? And why have we only seen one arrest? Here's my reading of the board. The preliminary hearing proved the prosecution has a strong, technology-driven case placing Keon King at the center of the events surrounding Kada's death. The evidence of kidnapping and tampering is robust. However, the direct link to the moment of murder is, as the defense noted, less explicit. This often happens in cases where a body is left outdoors for an extended period. Environmental degradation is the accomplice that destroys key evidence. The most significant leverage the prosecution has is the conspiracy charge and that surveillance video. It is the clearest avenue to pressure King or flip someone else involved. The fact that the other individual hasn't been identified publicly or charged suggests one of three things. Investigators are still building a case against that person is cooperating, or they've hit a wall. Given the methodical nature of the cover-up, my deduction is this was not a one-person operation. The weight at the rec center, the moving of the body, it speaks to planning and assistance. For the Scott family, the path ahead remains agonizing. A preliminary hearing is just the first legal gate. A trial means reliving this horror in even finer detail. For Keon King, the digital footprint he left behind has become the prime witness against him. Now, we want to hear from you. Based on the evidence laid out today, the pings, the texts, the video of two people, do you believe the state can secure a murder conviction beyond the conspiracy charge? Who do you think the second person in the video is? And does the lack of a direct forensic link to the shooting give you pause? Drop your theories in the comments below. If you want us to continue following every turn of this case as it moves toward trial, help us out. Like this video, it helps others find our coverage. Share it to spread the discussion. And most importantly, subscribe to True Crime Unravelled on YouTube and follow True Crime Unravelled TV on Facebook and TikTok. Hit the bell so you don't miss our next update, especially after that critical arraignment on February 23rd. Until then, remember that the search for justice is often a story told in two parts, the crime and the long, meticulous process of holding someone accountable.
With her name written across his jacket, Kada Scott's father, Kevin, left the Criminal Justice Center late this afternoon after coming face-to-face with the man accused of murdering his 23-year-old daughter.
The Kada Scott family is continuing to grieve. In fact, their grief is unimaginable, but so is their commitment for finding and maintaining accountability for this.
Prosecutors spent about 5 hours laying out evidence they say connects 21-year-old King to both the disappearance and death of Scott in a case that received national attention. The Philadelphia woman went missing on October 4th of last year, shortly after arriving to her job at an assisted living facility in Chestnut Hill. On the witness stand, her coworker told the court she saw her leave the building shortly after she arrived and that Kada was on the phone saying, "I can't believe you called me," and that she sounded very upset. Prosecutors allege Scott was on the phone with King and that she left work to meet him around 10 p.m. and was murdered sometime after. For 2 weeks, authorities diligently looked for the young woman, conducting searches at the Aubrey Arboretum in Germantown, an abandoned middle school across the street where they found her phone case and debit card. Scott's body was eventually found in a shallow grave on the grounds of the school's property on October 18th after an anonymous tip led detectives there for a second time. Prosecutors allege King and an unknown individual moved her body from the trunk of a vehicle less than 2 days after her murder and then burned the vehicle after she was buried. Much of today's testimony focused on cell phone and internet data. A homicide detective showed evidence he says connects King's phone and online accounts to Scott's place of work the night she disappeared, the Arboretum where her phone pinged, and the school where she was ultimately discovered. King's family and his attorney left without speaking today, but in court, Robert Gamberg argued the prosecution presented evidence involving a phone not subscribed to his client or anyone, adding what you don't have is anything connecting this defendant to the death of Miss Scott.
New details revealed as the man charged with killing Kada Scott appears in court. Prosecutors showed videos and images from where Kada's body was found in October, prompting an emotional response from family members in attendance. We also heard from detectives about the tips that led them to Kada after a 2-week search. It is Monday afternoon. I'm Sarah Bloomquist.
And I'm Brian Taft. The big story on Action News today is that preliminary hearing for Keon King. The 21-year-old has been held without bail since his arrest October 15th. Kada Scott's disappearance, of course, and death made national headlines.
Action News reporter Taronda Thomas was in court for the hearing that lasted all day today. She's live now in Center City with what we learned and reaction just in from family members. Taronda.
Well, Sarah and Brian, the judge ruled that the murder case against Keon King will move forward. This after disturbing details and photos were revealed in court today. Kada Scott's father, Kevin Scott, seen leaving court just a short time ago. Her family filled the courtroom for the preliminary hearing, which lasted for over 4 hours. Several witnesses testified, including a co-worker of Scott's, who said she received a phone call shortly after arriving to work on October 4th of last year, and she seemed upset during that call, saying something to the effect of, "I can't believe you're calling me," and that she seemed scared and had tears in her eyes. Prosecutors revealed evidence that pointed to Keon King as the person who made that 43-second phone call. Investigators also revealed evidence that the two had been texting in a way that suggested they'd planned to meet up that evening. Scott disappeared that night. Her body was found on October 18th at the abandoned Ada Lewis Middle School. In court, several investigators testified about Keon King's cell phone records showing he was in the vicinity of Scott's job as well as the school where her body was found. They also showed surveillance video that showed 2 people at a recreation center near that school. Prosecutors allege that King parked a stolen car there with Scott's body inside for more than 30 hours. Surveillance video shown in court today shows 2 people removing something that appeared to be heavy from that car. Investigators testified about receiving tips that eventually led them to Scott's body, which was in a shallow grave about 3 or 4 inches deep. That's when the prosecution showed those disturbing photos, with the judge warning the family first and some of them opting to leave the courtroom. The photos were of Scott's body, which was in a fetal position and had suffered from decomposition. A coroner's report says the cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head. Scott's family was emotional during the hearing, some gasping and crying as the photos were shown. Their attorney spoke afterwards.
Today was an incredibly difficult day for them. The Kada Scott family is continuing to grieve. In fact, their grief is unimaginable, but so is their commitment for finding and maintaining accountability for this.
Now, Kada Scott's phone, iPad, and Apple Watch were never found, but investigators testified today that they used an old iPad to trace her devices by using her Apple ID that was on that old iPad and then tracing her location for those new devices. Attorneys for Keon King, meanwhile, opting and saying that the prosecution never showed any evidence connecting him to the actual crime. King did appear in court today, which should say he looked very different from the mugshots with his dreadlocks shaven off, and a judge has ordered him to return to court on February 23rd for an arraignment. We're live in Center City. Taronda Thomas, Channel 6 Action News. Sarah and Brian.
Okay, Taronda, thank you.